Money buys tailored suits, private jets, and untouchable arrogance. It cannot, however, buy immunity from karma. This is the true story of a billionaire who weaponized a forgotten language to degrade a humble waitress, oblivious to the fact that he was speaking her native tongue. Friday evenings at Laura, a two-Michelin-starred establishment nestled in the ultra-wealthy enclave of Manhattan's Upper East Side, operated on a frequency of controlled panic. The air was thick with the scent of black truffles, aged burgundy, and the unspoken tension of the city's most powerful people demanding absolute perfection. For Beatrice Gallagher, a 26-year-old waitress working double shifts to keep her mother's staggering medical debts at bay, Laura was a golden cage. The tips were astronomical, but the emotional toll of serving the fiercely entitled was a heavy burden to bear. Beatrice was good at her job because she possessed the one trait the ultra-rich valued above all else in their service staff: invisibility. She knew how to materialize with a fresh bottle of sparkling water just as a glass was emptied, and how to vanish before her presence interrupted a lucrative corporate merger being discussed over dry-aged Wagyu. On this particular Friday, the restaurant manager, a high-strung man named Gregory, cornered Beatrice near the service station. His forehead was beaded with sweat. "Table 4. Gregory whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Preston Harrington?" Beatrice nodded, keeping her expression completely neutral, though her stomach performed a tight, uncomfortable flip. Preston Harrington III was a notorious figure in the New York hospitality scene. Heir to a sprawling, ruthless real estate empire, Preston treated service workers with a cruelty that bordered on sport. He was the kind of man who would send a $200 steak back 3 times just to watch the kitchen scramble, the kind of man who viewed a high restaurant bill not as a purchase of food, but as a purchase of the right to humiliate. Accompanying Preston that evening were his fiancée Camilla Davenport, a woman whose icy demeanor and diamond-encrusted fingers matched her inherited wealth, and Jasper Montgomery, Preston's closest friend and chief financial officer. They swept into the restaurant like a conquering army, completely ignoring the maître d' as they bypassed the waiting area and claimed the most secluded, luxurious leather booth in the dining room. Beatrice approached the table, her posture straight, a crisp white linen towel draped perfectly over her left forearm. "Good evening. Welcome to Laura. My name is Beatrice, and it will be my absolute pleasure to take care of you tonight. May I start you off with some sparkling or still water?" Preston didn't even look up from his phone. He simply raised 2 fingers in the air and gave them a dismissive flick. It was a gesture one might use to shoo away a stray dog. "Sparkling. Ice, but not too much ice. And bring the sommelier. I don't want to talk to you about wine." Preston commanded, his voice dripping with aristocratic boredom. "Right away, sir," Beatrice replied, pivoting smoothly and retreating to the service alley. She breathed in deeply, grounding herself. Just another shift, she reminded herself. Just another spoiled man. When she returned to pour the water, she found Preston, Camilla, and Jasper deep in conversation. But they weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking French, Italian, or any of the standard languages of international business. They were speaking Romansh. Beatrice's hand, hovering over Camilla's crystal water goblet, froze for a fraction of a second. Romansh is a deeply obscure Romance language spoken by roughly 40,000 people in the isolated alpine valleys of the Swiss canton of Graubünden. It is a dying tongue, a beautiful, guttural, and melodic language that sounds like a collision between ancient Latin and rough alpine German. It was also the language Beatrice's grandfather, Florin, had spoken to her every single day of her childhood. Florin had emigrated from a tiny village near St. Moritz in the 1960s, working his fingers to the bone as a carpenter in Queens. He had taught Beatrice Romansh as their special secret, a way to stay connected to a homeland he would never see again. To Beatrice, Romansh was the language of warm hearths, of folk songs sung over hot cocoa, of deep, unconditional familial love. Hearing it slither from the lips of Preston Harrington was jarring. Beatrice kept pouring her face a mask of absolute professional indifference. She listened. "Look at the shoes she's wearing," Preston said in flawless, albeit slightly accented, Romansh. He didn't bother to lower his voice. He leaned back against the plush leather, making direct eye contact with Beatrice as he spoke the alien words. "Scuffed at the toes. You can smell the poverty on her. It's absolutely tragic that places like this let the peasants walk so close to the tables." Camilla let out a high, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Darling, don't be cruel," she replied in the same obscure Swiss dialect. "She's probably trying to save up for a fake Louis Vuitton bag. Give the little ant some grace." "I give grace to things that matter, Camilla," Jasper chimed in, swirling his scotch. "These people are just background noise. They don't hear, they don't see, they just fetch." Beatrice finished pouring the water. Her pulse was thundering in her ears, a violent staccato rhythm against her eardrums. She realized immediately what was happening. Preston and his Ivy League boarding school-educated friends had likely spent their winters skiing in St. Moritz. They had picked up the local dialect, not out of respect for the culture, but to use it as a weaponized secret code. They used it to mock degrade and belittle the people serving them, secure in the absolute certainty that no working-class waitress in New York City could ever possibly understand a dying Swiss mountain dialect. They thought they were completely insulated by their wealth and their elite education. They thought she was deaf to their cruelty. Beatrice placed the water pitcher down. She looked Preston directly in the eyes and smiled a warm, radiant, and utterly hollow smile. "I will send the sommelier over immediately, sir. Please let me know if there is anything else you require." She walked away, her spine forged of absolute steel. She was not going to cry. She was not going to break. The shift had just begun, and if Preston Harrington wanted to play a game of secrets, Beatrice was more than ready to let him dig his own grave. As the evening wore on, the dining room of Laura reached a fever pitch of culinary choreography. Waiters darted between tables with silver cloches, and the soft murmur of wealthy patrons provided a steady humming bass line to the clinking of heavy silver cutlery. But at table 4, the atmosphere was toxic. Beatrice moved in and out of their orbit, serving the first course, a delicate seared foie gras with a blackberry reduction. Every time she approached the table, Preston took it as an opportunity to practice his vile brand of Romansh comedy. "Careful, Jasper," Preston said smoothly in the Alpine tongue, watching Beatrice carefully set the Limoges porcelain plates down. "Don't let her breathe on your food. Who knows what kind of public transit diseases she's carrying? Look at her hands, rough as sandpaper. Honestly, Preston, she looks like she hasn't slept in a week. They really should enforce a stricter grooming standard here." Camilla added in, Romansh picking up her fork and inspecting it as if she expected to find dirt on the tines. Beatrice's jaw tightened, but she forced her facial muscles to remain entirely slack. She focused on the mechanical movements of her job. Left side to serve, right side to clear. She retreated to the shadows near the wine cellar, her heart burning with a quiet, furious inferno. Her grandfather's language, the beautiful words he used to tell her stories of snow-capped mountains and alpine ibexes, was being dragged through the mud by people whose souls were bankrupt. But as the main courses approached, the conversation at table 4 shifted from petty insults directed at Beatrice to something much darker and far more dangerous. Beatrice approached the table to pour a vintage Bordeaux They had selected a bottle that cost more than Beatrice's rent for 3 months. As the crimson liquid flowed into the crystal glasses, Preston leaned in closely to Jasper. "The zoning board is entirely in my pocket," Preston murmured in Romansh, taking a sip of the wine and nodding in approval. "That Inspector Davis I wired 50,000 to his offshore account this morning. The harbour development project is greenlit. We start demolishing the low-income housing on the waterfront by next Tuesday." Jasper chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "And the board of directors? What about your father? If he finds out you bypassed the environmental review by bribing a city official, he'll strip you of your shares." "The old man is a dinosaur," Preston scoffed in Romansh, wiping his mouth with the linen napkin. "He's stepping down in 6 months anyway. By the time anyone realizes the soil on that waterfront is toxic, the condos will be built, sold to foreign investors, and we'll be completely insulated. The city will be stuck, holding the bag." Beatrice's hand trembled fractionally. She wasn't just listening to the cruel ramblings of a spoiled billionaire anymore. She was standing a foot away from a confession to a massive federal crime, complete with bribery, real estate fraud, and environmental negligence. Preston was laying out his entire criminal enterprise in a crowded restaurant, completely shielded by his absolute arrogance and a language he believed was his private domain. "And Camilla?" Jasper asked in Romansh, glancing at the woman who was currently entirely focused on her phone. "She still doesn't know about the prenup loophole." Preston smirked, looking at his fiancée with a chilling lack of affection. "She thinks she gets half if I walk away. She doesn't realize my lawyers buried a clause on page 82 that ties her payout to a holding company in the Caymans that I am currently bankrupting. If she ever gets boring, I can drop her, and she'll leave with nothing but the jewelry she's wearing." Beatrice stepped back, taking the empty wine bottle with her. The absolute sociopathy on display was staggering. Preston Harrington was betraying everyone, the city his father, his business partners, and the woman sitting right next to him. She walked back to the kitchen, feeling a strange mix of nausea and profound clarity. But Preston was not finished with her. 10 minutes later, Beatrice was preparing to bring out a side of truffle-infused fingerling potatoes. Through the porthole window of the kitchen door, she watched table 4. Preston was holding up a single dark hair. It clearly belonged to Camilla, whose long brunette locks were draped over the collar of her designer coat. Preston laughed, speaking rapidly in Romansh to his companions. Beatrice read his lips and recognized the harsh consonants of the dialect. "Watch this," Preston said carefully, placing the long hair directly onto the center of his half-eaten, medium-rare ribeye. "I'm bored. Let's have some fun with the peasant. I'm going to make a massive scene, get this entire $1,000 meal comped, and demand that the manager fire her on the spot. It's always amusing watching them beg for their minimum wage jobs." Camilla giggled. Jasper smirked and raised his glass in a toast to Preston's cruelty. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her entirely cold. This wasn't just a matter of enduring verbal abuse anymore. This man was actively, intentionally plotting to destroy her livelihood for the sheer entertainment value of watching her suffer. If she lost this job, her mother's treatment would stop. They would be evicted. Preston was playing with her life as if it were a cheap toy he wanted to break out of boredom. She turned sharply and walked into the manager's office. Gregory was looking over the nightly receipts, looking stressed. "Gregory, we have a problem at table 4, Beatrice said, her voice eerily calm. Gregory's head snapped up. What did you do? I told you. Beatrice Harrington is a VIP. His family owns half the commercial real estate on this block." "I didn't do anything," Beatrice replied, keeping her voice steady. "But Preston Harrington," just planted a hair from his fiancée's head onto his steak. He is about to call you over, demand our meal be comped, and demand that you fire me. I am warning you before he does it." Gregory paled. He stood up, pacing behind his small desk. "Are you sure? How could you possibly know that? Did you hear him say it?" "I heard him," Beatrice said firmly. "Look, Beatrice," Gregory stammered, refusing to meet her eyes. "If Mr. Harrington says there was a hair in his food, there was a hair in his food. We comp the meal. It's standard procedure. We can't accuse him of lying." "And the part where he demands you fire me?" She pressed. Gregory looked at the floor. "You can take the rest of the week off. We'll talk about your future here on Monday. I have to protect the restaurant, B. I'm sorry. You know how powerful these people are." Beatrice stared at the manager. In that moment, she realized the devastating truth of the world she worked in. The rules did not apply to men like Preston. The system was designed to protect them, to coddle their worst impulses, and to sacrifice people like Beatrice without a second thought. Gregory was too terrified of losing his own job to stand up for her. She was entirely alone. But as the fear washed over her, it was quickly replaced by something else. Something hot, sharp, and brilliantly clear. It was the memory of her grandfather, a man who had built a life with his bare hands, a man of profound dignity, who bowed to no one. She didn't need Gregory to protect her. She didn't need anyone's permission to defend her own dignity. "Never mind, Gregory," Beatrice said quietly. "I'll handle table 4. Before the manager could protest, Beatrice grabbed her silver serving tray, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the kitchen doors. The dining room lights seemed to catch the determination in her eyes. She marched directly toward the VIP booth, where Preston Harrington was just raising his hand, his mouth open, preparing to shout for a manager. He was expecting a terrified, subservient waitress. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Preston Harrington's right arm was fully extended, his fingers snapping sharply to summon the terrified manager. He had already inhaled deeply, expanding his chest to project his indignation across the hushed, elegant expanse of the dining room. Beatrice intercepted him before a single syllable could leave his mouth. She stepped squarely into his line of sight, placing the silver tray of truffle-infused fingerling potatoes onto the center of the table with a soft, definitive clink. Her movements were unnervingly precise. She did not bow her head. She did not offer the subservient, frightened smile he was anticipating. Instead, she stood perfectly upright, her dark eyes locking onto his with the intensity of a predator assessing a trapped mouse. "Is there an issue with your ribeye, Mr. Harrington?" Beatrice asked in English, her voice calm and remarkably loud. It was loud enough that the wealthy patrons at the adjacent tables paused their conversations, their attention magnetically drawn to the brewing conflict. Preston dropped his hand, his upper lip curling into a sneer. He pointed a manicured finger at the center of his plate. "An issue? Yes, there is an absolute disaster on this plate. Look at this," he barked, his voice dripping with venom. "There is a massive dark hair, tangled right in the center of my Wagyu. This is utterly repulsive. Laura is supposed to have standards, yet they let filth like you handle the food. I want the manager right now, and I want you out of my sight. You are fired." Jasper Montgomery leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug, expectant smirk. Camilla Davenport sighed dramatically, picking up her phone to seemingly distance herself from the unpleasantness of dealing with the lower class. Beatrice looked down at the steak. She looked at the hair. Then she looked at Camilla's long brunette extensions. When Beatrice finally spoke, the air in the restaurant seemed to turn to ice. She did not speak in English. She did not speak in French. She spoke in Romansh. "It is a very beautiful hair, Preston," Beatrice said, her accent flawless, her pronunciation carrying the raw, guttural melody of the Swiss alpine valleys. "But we both know it belongs to Camilla. I watched you pull it from her coat 10 seconds ago and place it on the meat." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Preston's sneer vanished, replaced by an expression of sheer, unadulterated shock. All the blood rushed from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His jaw dropped. He stared at the woman in the cheap black uniform, his brain violently short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible reality unfolding before him. Jasper's smug smile slid off his face like wet clay. He choked on his own saliva, coughing into his linen napkin. Camilla's head snapped up from her phone, her perfectly threaded eyebrows shooting toward her hairline. What did you just say?" Preston stammered in English, his voice a pathetic, reedy whisper. He was trembling. The impenetrable armor of his wealth had just been entirely shattered by a single sentence. Beatrice leaned in closer, resting her palms on the edge of the mahogany table. She wasn't finished. She was going to burn his entire world to the ground, and she was going to do it in the language of her grandfather. "I said you are a liar," Beatrice continued her Romansh, slipping into a harsher, more commanding register. "I also said that my shoes may be scuffed, and my hands may be rough, but my soul is not rotting inside my chest like yours." Preston tried to speak, tried to assert his dominance, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. He was entirely paralyzed by the terror of exposure. Beatrice turned her gaze to Camilla. The heiress looked terrified, realizing that the peasant had understood every cruel joke they had made at her expense all evening. But Beatrice had a much bigger prize in mind than petty revenge for insults. "He does not love you, Camilla," Beatrice said softly, switching flawlessly back to English, so the surrounding tables could hear the poison spilling over. Then, to ensure Preston felt the true agony of his arrogance, she switched back to Romansh for the fatal blow. "Page 82 of your prenuptial agreement. He has tied your entire payout to a Cayman Islands holding company that he is actively bankrupting. If he leaves you, you get absolutely nothing. He bragged about it while I poured your Bordeaux." Camilla gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She whipped her head around to look at Preston. "Preston, what is she talking about? Is that true?" Preston was hyperventilating his eyes, darting frantically around the room. The adjacent tables were completely silent now, listening intently to the elite soap opera unfolding at table 4. "And as for your little real estate venture," Beatrice whispered in Romansh, leaning directly into Preston's personal space. Her voice was as cold as a St. Moritz winter. "Bribing City Inspector Davis with $50,000 to approve a toxic waterfront site, demolishing low-income housing on poisoned soil. It is a fascinating strategy. I wonder how the Federal Bureau of Investigation will feel about your offshore wire transfers." Jasper stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "We are leaving." He panicked, his eyes wide, with the realization that they had just confessed to federal felonies in front of a witness. "Preston, get up right now." But Preston couldn't move. He was staring at Beatrice as if she were a ghost, a demon summoned from the Swiss Alps specifically to destroy him. Who are you?" Preston breathed, completely broken. Beatrice stood up straight, smoothing her apron. "My name is Beatrice Gallagher. My grandfather was Florin from Graubünden. He built this city with his bare hands while your family stole from it." She reached behind her neck and untied the knot of her apron. "And for the record, Preston," Beatrice said in crystal clear English, ensuring every single patron in the dining room heard her final verdict. "You don't have to fire me, because I wouldn't serve a pathetic, corrupt, cowardly little boy like you if my life depended on it." Camilla Davenport didn't wait for Preston. She grabbed her diamond-studded clutch, threw her glass of vintage Bordeaux directly into Preston's lap, and stormed out of the restaurant, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. Beatrice tossed her folded apron onto the center of the table, right next to the contaminated Wagyu steak. She turned her back on the ruined billionaire and walked out of the dining room. Nobody stopped her. Even Gregory, the manager, stood frozen by the hostess, stand utterly speechless. Walking out of Laura into the crisp Manhattan night air was the most liberating experience of Beatrice's life, but she knew the battle was not entirely over. Preston Harrington was a wounded animal with limitless resources, and wounded animals lash out. If she simply went home, he would use his money to bury her, to discredit her, or worse. She needed a shield, and she needed an offensive strike. Sitting on a park bench on Fifth Avenue, adrenaline coursing through her veins, Beatrice pulled out her smartphone. She didn't call the police. Local precincts were too easily swayed by the Harrington family lawyers. Instead, she opened a browser and searched for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower office. She also searched for Richard Brooks, a notoriously aggressive investigative journalist for the Wall Street Journal, who had built his career taking down corrupt New York developers. She drafted a meticulous, detailed email to Brooks. She outlined exactly what she had heard: the name of Inspector Davis, the exact amount of the bribe, $50,000, the specific waterfront project, the toxic soil cover-up, and the use of offshore Cayman accounts. She noted the time, the date, and the fact that Jasper Montgomery, CFO of Harrington Enterprises, was a direct witness to the confession. She hit send. The ensuing fallout was not just a scandal, it was an absolute financial massacre. Richard Brooks did not ignore the email. The level of specific detail Beatrice provided allowed him to pull public zoning records, cross-reference offshore shell companies, and corner City Inspector Davis. Davis, a weak-willed bureaucrat terrified of federal prison time, folded in less than 48 hours, confessing to accepting the wire transfer from Preston Harrington's shell company. 3 days after the incident at Laura, federal agents raided the corporate headquarters of Harrington Enterprises. Preston Harrington was arrested in the lobby of his luxury penthouse building, handcuffed in front of his wealthy neighbors, his face splashed across the front page of every major newspaper in the country. The charges were staggering wire fraud, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy to commit environmental crimes. His father, Preston Harrington II, a ruthless patriarch who valued the family name above all else, immediately convened an emergency board meeting. Preston was completely stripped of his shares, removed from his position as CEO, and publicly disowned by the corporation to save the company's stock price. Camilla Davenport, true to Beatrice's warning, hired the most vicious divorce attorneys in Manhattan. She used the public scandal to invalidate the prenuptial agreement on the grounds of fraud, securing a massive settlement before Preston's assets could be entirely frozen by the federal government. As for Beatrice, the universe rewarded her courage in a way she never anticipated, because her information directly led to the SEC uncovering massive corporate fraud and the halting of a deeply illegal real estate development. She officially qualified for the SEC Whistleblower Reward Program. It took 8 months of legal red tape depositions and anxious waiting, but when the dust finally settled and the fines were levied against Harrington Enterprises, Beatrice received a percentage of the recovered penalties. The check was for $2.4 million. She paid off her mother's medical debts in a single afternoon. She moved them out of their cramped apartment and bought a beautiful sunlit house in upstate New York, far away from the toxic hustle of the elite service industry. One quiet Sunday morning, sitting on her new porch with a cup of hot coffee, Beatrice looked out at the rolling hills. They weren't the snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps, but they were peaceful. She smiled, thinking of Florin. Her grandfather had left her nothing in terms of financial wealth, but he had given her a secret weapon, a beautiful dying language that she had used to slay a dragon. Money could buy many things, but it could never buy the absolute power of knowing exactly who you are and exactly where you come from. If you loved this incredible story of karma, justice, and the ultimate payback, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that arrogance always has a price. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life drama stories every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Beatrice's shoes? See you in the next video.